Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad you've braved this evening to come join us. My name is Alicia Poon. I'm the Indian Arts Research Center Director. And I'm here to welcome you to the second installation of RISE, Cultural Preservation in the 21st Century. So tonight, Maile Andrade, multimedia artist, professor at Kamakakūokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa, and SAR's 2012 Eric and Barbara Dobkin Native Artist Fellow, joins Marques Hanalei Marzan, Hawaiian fiber artist and cultural advisor for the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, for an open dialogue on the relevance and changing world of Indigenous visual arts practices for contemporary Native artists. So art plays a key role in promoting cultural values and understanding for this and future generations. And while they began as teacher and student, Andrade and Marzan continue to explore these issues as fellow artists and cultural educators. So before we welcome Maile and Marques to the stage, I do want to mention that due to the public health emergency that we're currently experiencing, the next two speaker series on March 18th and 25th have unfortunately been canceled. We will explore possibly rescheduling our speakers at a later date, however, but in the meantime, thank you for your patience and your understanding. So now on to the good stuff. Please join me in welcoming Maile Andrade and Marques Hanalei Marzan.
Le o nai ke kupi na ioko lalo leo e leo walo no ya he leo paka hea ke kola wahi e mala mai ka o le loi kuliana e ki pa mai e leo e ko kolo ana i ke be o na kupuna o e we ia he iwi ho o kahino ka ko e he au ko e na hoa hana wika i puka ha mama e uno no mai ana i ka hali le hua e he ane e kipa o ko mako alo kupuna kai o ni kana wei mua o ko mako uhai ai ke lalo ko o puhalau o ko mako i ke veo ke kaulapiko o kahi kako i ke aloha o ke aloha wale noe. Aloha. I just wanted to offer a traditional form that we do in Hawaii to recognize the place that we are visiting, especially because when we travel, we are not of that place. We would like to recognize and honor the place, the people of the land that we are visiting and connecting with. And this is something that is really important to us. You know, the connection to our environment, to the relationships that we build with one another in every instance is integral into our daily life and practices. So that was a recognition that we are all connected. In the words, it actually speaks of how we all are different places, different people. But if we go back far enough, we connect. All of our genealogical lines and connections actually become one, and we become one large family. Yeah? So it is that recognition that we, even though we might not be of direct relationship to one another at this moment, but we do tie to one another if we go back far enough. So aloha and thank you for coming.
Hear me? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I wanted to acknowledge the people who invited us, and we're really thankful for being here. I was here in 2013, and I haven't been, this is my next visit, you know, I haven't been here since then. And I really, really enjoyed my time here and did a body of work when I was here at that time in glass, actually, which was a new media for me. So I wanted to acknowledge SAR and the Indian Arts and Cultural Research Center. And I think the job and the collection is just really beautiful. And, you know, these are points in which we refer to in our journey of referring to our relatives and the work that we do within the bigger picture, because there's a lot of similarities in our custom practices. We're going to do a little intro of ourselves. As it was mentioned, I work at the university. I used to work in the art department as a professor, and then I switched out and went to Hawaiian Studies because we found that that naturally, as natives, we see the world in a very visual way. It's just a natural thing for us. And I wanted to give another point of view in academia for our native students. So I started a program called Native Hawaiian Creative Expression, and we teach from a native point of view different medias. And our students will take the classes in this area and come out with a bachelor's or master's degree in Hawaiian Studies at the University of Mānoa in Honolulu. I don't live on that island. I live on another island in Kauai, and so I commute, and it's so worth it because it's a country environment, and I like going back and coming to that pace and do my work there. That's where my studio is.
Aloha. Like what much was already introduced in, with Alicia, my name is Marques Hanalei Marzan, a student of Maile Andrade at the University of Hawaii, and so fortunate to be able to work with her over the many years that we have had many experiences, both in the artistic realm at the university and in schooling, as well as in our own professional practices. But currently I also serve as the cultural advisor for Bishop Museum. Been serving there for, at the museum for, at this point, over 17 years, helping with the development of cultural content for exhibitions, for programming, and also providing access to researchers, collections, research access of collections to scientists, scholars, cultural practitioners, communities, to connect and reconnect with their ancestral ancestral pieces that we care for. And again, I think I'm so fortunate that I'm able to have bridge a lot of those elements with my training through Maile and other elders in the community in Hawaii on the traditional practices, but alongside the more traditional museum studies practices and bringing all of those worlds and modalities of thinking together to move our whole community forward. So
Marques and I are going to have a conversation, which means we're going to sit down. And but I wanted to start off by pointing out that in our Hawaiian language, the word for learning and teaching is the same word. And so aku mai is a directional. When knowledge comes this way, you're learning, and aku means, you know, aku means you're going that direction. And so when we teach, I tell my students that I'm not only teaching, but I'm learning. And we learn from each other. And many of my students, like Marques, has now become, you know, we hope that our students actually excel, you know, more than doing more things than we do. Because that's the nature of gathering the ike or the mana or the knowledge that you want them to have more and more and more. So I wanted to point that out, that knowledge goes both ways. And no one is really the expert of anything, because we learn as we observe, and we learn as we teach, and we learn by observing other people. So that's sort of setting the premise. Our focus, I think, was trying to talk to how we as contemporary natives live in our world, and how do we find our voice in this world in a different situation based on foundations of our ancestors. And as Marques mentioned, one of his great accesses he has is he's with those kupuna and those museums all the time, because we believe that those old pieces are not just objects, but they're actually our elders. And so we go to learn from them. When we see those things in the museum, we're actually learning from those pieces, and they speak to us. And they have, sometimes I go in and I have to do my little prayer, and I ask, what do you want to show me today? And if I don't, then I get kind of scattered in, and you get overwhelmed by just technique and process. But sometimes when I can just relax and open up, I'm given things to see that I probably would not normally see if I had my own agenda.
Yeah, so much like what Maile mentioned about the Hawaiian word for learning and teaching, a'o, it's true for many things. For instance, like there is no word in Hawaii for art. There is no single word that can be used to describe that term in English. The closest thing is no'el, which is skilled. Yeah, and anything can be skilled. You can be a skilled carver. You can be a skilled bark cloth maker. You can be a skilled astronomer. A medicine person. All of those terms. So the idea of art and that excellence of practice is imbued in every aspect of daily living. And I think that's something that is really important, especially to be nurtured. Especially, I think we had a conversation a little bit earlier with Alicia about the first speaker who spoke on Hawaiian language and the different practices. And it is true, back in the 1970s, there was this kind of renaissance of the Hawaiian language and different cultural practices that was being reborn in Hawaii, because the generations before were, again, much like in many indigenous communities, were suppressed by the colonial or Christian upbringings that they were being taught. And this older generation at that time didn't want those things to be lost. So they themselves made a concerted effort to teach these skills outside of their practices, or even the young generation went out to go learn those skills because they didn't know where to go to bring that skill back to life. And that's a very big shift in the way Hawaiian understanding was, and it's true and I know in a lot of the indigenous communities that I've connected with, because typically you would teach within your family. You would pass down that skill and information from one family member to the next family member, and in many of the instances, especially for me, my family, my great-grandmother was the last pandanus weaver in my family. And her children, or none of her grandchildren at that time, wanted to learn from her. So she passed away with that knowledge. And that was true for so many families in Hawaii. And there were at least a handful of master weavers during this time that knew that this was happening all throughout Hawaii. And they made concerted efforts to actually form kind of organizations or clubs to teach the skills that they were caring for outside of their family, because they knew that their family wasn't going to be that vessel to convey that information to the next generation. And they knew that family and other people in the community were really wanting to learn that.
Yeah. And that doesn't come without a struggle, because Marques is like my child, because all my children are his same age. And so my parents' generation, what Marques mentioned, they were punished in school, and I guess it's the same story in that generational time. And they weren't allowed to speak their native languages. And so my parent couldn't speak, my grandparent could. And then when my generation came along, the elders realized that if we don't pass on, as Marques mentioned, then things will be lost. And I believe it was a big struggle for some families because some elders did not pass out outside of their families. And we were still hoping, I mean, my hope is I still can identify, I'm a teacher, so I teach everyone, but I'm hoping within my family, now I have granddaughters who are making bark cloth or starting to weave, that they will continue the practice, you know, because then it stays within a certain line and conversation, actually. I think that was a struggle at the time where people were trying to decide. I'm on a big research now, and I got a little grant from First People Fund to interview teachers of weaving. And that's what I'm hearing from my generation is teaching, and we are transcribing because my master has passed, that generation is gone. And their interviews are in the Hawaiian language, and as we transcribe it out, they were very, very concerned that things would be lost. Marques mentioned there's a time in the 70s where was a renaissance, a Hawaiian renaissance it's known as, where the navigation, you know, so we have canoes that have now gone around the world, a canoe, hokulea, and has gone back and forth through the Pacific without any kind of natural navigation skills, you know, from the stars, from the currents, from the wind, from the, you know, just signs around you. And they have brought back that skill. But along with one skill, we also know that everything is interchangeable. So with the canoes brought, okay, sailing, weaving sails, or food preparation for voyaging, or making ropes, or my husband was part of that hokulea crew, and they sailed, you know, he did New Zealand to Tonga to Samoa, then Tahiti, Hawaii, you know, and they found their mark. And they also had a master navigator who came from Samoa who trained them because we lost the skill. So in some of the smaller islands that still live in their traditional practices or customary practices, they're still practicing, but you have to sort of find these little pockets. I think for us, and the language now, you know, I have my youngest son, we put him in the language school, and he graduated in the first class, which was 1999, and all his learning, high school, was all in the Hawaiian language. And as a parent of that group, actually, it was very interesting because we had to cut and paste books all the time. You know, they didn't have enough resources for this class. And so as they're translating, and maybe they're talking about a certain subject that was not printed, we had to like type it out in a computer, get books, paste it in, hand them out to the kids so they had reading, as well as there was a group of language experts that had to start to translate words into native language, such as, and then big debates, and a good one would be computer. What would be the Hawaiian word for computer? Because there was no computer in the old days. And so, you know, one part of the group will say, okay, we'll just take the word computer and Hawaiianize it. And then, you know, computela, that's the word. And then there's this other group, which was good afterwards. They, given more time, they thought, okay, what does a computer do? So now the word for computer is lightning brain, you know? So getting concepts of the thing that is contemporary and giving it, you know, for language, and that's how language grows and flourishes. So every year they come out with a new listing of new words, such as when they're teaching about dinosaurs. What are dinosaur scales? I mean, I don't think my ancestors saw dinosaur scales, you know, but they have to teach that whole science thing and math. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's beauty for that. And there's cohorts now. I'm at the university, so there's cohorts of students who decide to become immersion teachers because they're taught immersion. You know, they only can speak, and then encourage the parents to go to classes so they can speak at home. Our fear is not they don't get English, because you're going to get English. You watch television, everyone around you is getting English, is getting our native language to a higher level, not just conversational, but also doing protocols and doing all the other stuff that Marques actually is trained in.
Yeah. And I think that's also, like Maile was mentioning, a really important aspect of culture, because every generation is different, right? Every generation will have their relationship with the land, with the society, and that perspective will change for each generation. But much like this, her example of the electric brain scenario, it's trying to remember how our ancestors thought. I think that's the important thing, to just think about how you perceive your world is the most important thing, actually, I think, to me. Because once you understand that and understand the way your ancestors thought, you can go forward and move into the future and still have that connection to that way of thinking, which will connect you to all of those different aspects of life and community and engagement in every way. If you just completely sever yourself and then start anew, you have no root, nowhere to start from. You're just going to be going in every direction and have no way to maneuver how you're going to connect with the world or other people. So to really stress that, too, especially with our younger generations, which are, they're always trying to look at the new things, the new technology and everything, but always, I think what many of the generations before us and the current generations now are trying to do is to really promote the idea of just reconnecting to how you perceive your world and your relationship to each other. Because that's always been a constant in every generation from Hawaii and I assume in many peoples and communities around the world. Once you lose that connection, that's when you start kind of veering off into different ways and really not finding that consistency that connects us all together. And I think that's what both Maile and I have tried to do in our artwork. I think there's one question that always comes up is, what is Hawaiian art? What is Hawaiian art? Which is, it's like, I don't know how you can describe that or answer that question. And we've had discussions about what that is to our own, from our own opinion. And I don't know, maybe Maile can answer that, what she thinks about what is Hawaiian art.
Well, this discussion comes up a lot, and I'm kind of in a place in my life where I don't really feel that I have to justify my work anymore. I am who I am, and that's the way it is, and my DNA is Native Hawaiian and half Chinese. My father's pure Chinese and my mother's pure Hawaiian. And but when I work from a foundation of a Native perspective. And that is why I moved out of the art department, which was just theory and light and all those art theories. And when I'm in Hawaiian Studies, I'm talking about stuff from our culture that students can express in a visual language, because art is just a visual language. There's the writers, there's the dancers, it's all a creative process, but we're using the visuals to create our voice and to say what we have to say. But with that, as being a Native, and I choose, I could say I'm just an artist and not even be a Native. And that's pretty freeing. I can just do whatever I like. But if I mention I am a Native artist, I am distinctly pointing out that I work from that reference of Native foundation and Native thought and that perspective. And my responsibility, it comes with responsibility, is to be aware that whatever my voice is, that I have to allow that dialogue to happen as well. Maybe people won't agree, but I have to be open to that, because that's part of education, and I'm also part of education. And that's why I shifted out of the art department and went to Hawaiian Studies, because I felt our students, I could have remained in the art department. I have an MFA in ceramics and fiber arts. I could have remained in the art department and teach the basic cultural level to non-natives. And I chose to go to the art department, to the Hawaiian Studies, because most of our students are Native Hawaiian, but they don't believe they're artists. They don't see their world in a visual way, but I think we naturally do. They just forgotten. And so I'm there to remind them that whatever their connection is to their families or their kupuna, which is their elders, that they need to go pay attention and find out what their families are doing, because all that knowledge is there, but they've not connected back in. So I think that's my role today. I don't know if I answered that or not, but that's my thought too. And I think as you get older, you kind of get a little more cockier, and so you're just going, I don't care what people think. I'm just going to do my thing, and it's Native Hawaiian art,
Yeah, but I think that's to me, that's the hard thing, that people that don't have that mindset kind of get trapped in, because they always think, okay, it has to have this design or this color scheme or this thing, kind of the building blocks of what art is. You can say that for Japanese art or Greek carving. There are kind of stereotypical ideas of what that artwork looks like, but in Hawaiian art, it's completely different, because there is that ancestral patterning and design that was created by generations past, but all of the generations today and into the future will not use those same designs. They might incorporate those designs into their work, but they might be creating new pieces and new designs with new stories that reference to that. And what I always like to share with people that learn from me or in different presentations is all the innovations and the creativity of our ancestors is what we consider traditional today, or customary today. And if we think about the same thing today, all the things we are creating today as contemporary and innovative is going to be considered customary or traditional to our future generations. So it's this continuum rather than just these kind of boxes. Yeah, definitely. It's not like one is separate from the other. They're all connected. It's just where you place yourself in time, which makes the difference. Yeah, because they all have the same understanding, the same way of presenting the information, the same way of telling the story. It's just from the perspective of the moment, the present. Yeah.
So what you're seeing here is we were just going to have this conversation and not have visual, and then we thought, people don't know our work. And so we're scrolling this, and every other one is a different image. And I think if you are grounded in your culture, then, because we still have this debate, and I find that it's mostly with the youngins, because they're still finding self-identity. They still trying to figure out what that is for them. And that's just part of the discovery. And so they have the checklist, like Marcus said. I actually did a piece once called Hawaiian at Heart, and you would open these hearts, and in the heart it would say, oh, I paddle canoe, I have Hawaiian bracelets. It's like a check system, but culture's not like that, is it? You can't just check and say, I'm more than you, and where did that come up? So I think you just have to always pay attention and, learn as much as you can, and go to the elder that you can. I teach a fiber art class that we do bark cloth, which is kapa for us, and weaving and net making and basketry in a simple form, the beginning, and then they come back for an advance. And most of the students depend on me for their knowledge, and one of the assignments is they have to interview an elder in their family that practices one of those media, and it's so surprising for them to discover that they had an uncle who made nets, still today, or had a grandmother that wove. And sometimes all that knowledge is, it's just reminding them they have to go back and look at their family, not out there. It's all within their area, they just got to ask, but they're too shy.
Yeah, no, that's much like what, when I was a student of Maile, I also did that. I asked my grandmother, my Japanese grandmother, of where her family comes from and the connections to textiles. And she started to tell me all of these stories, and then I was like, wow, this is amazing. She said that we came from these silk weavers in Japan, and we made these, and she told me all of these amazing stories about the family crest and everything. And then I go and I share this with my mom, and my mom's like, where did you learn, where did you get all this information? And I said, I asked Grandma. And my mom goes over and asks her mom, why didn't you ever tell me these stories? And she said, you never asked. And I think that's the thing, and I've noticed also when, I think much like what Maile is doing in her interviews with different masters, when you start asking questions to different people, it starts to wake up things that they weren't thinking about for many, many years. And it starts to kind of really invigorate them and start them thinking about those old ways or things that they did when they were little children. Or why they would do certain things. There were stories that my uncle shared about my great-grandmother about what all the little things that she would do around the house. Like she would put little rocks on things when a storm was going to come, or hide the red cloth, or all these different things. And it's like, wow, those kind of interesting stories. And then she would she would just constantly be praying. He said she would be praying outside with the rocks and then with the trees and the bushes and everything. And this is my uncle when he was only like 5 years old, his recollections of my great-grandmother. But when I hear all of those stories and what I know now about the old practices, it's like she was connecting with her environment. She was asking the ancestors of the land to protect this home and her family. She was placing these rocks on these things to keep them from flying away. Even though my uncle said, she would sometimes put a little rock on this big thing. It's not going to do anything, physically, because it's just this little pebble. But the idea of like Maile mentioned, the idea of the spiritual power and mana of what that act of placing this one little stone onto something to ask for that help and protection of that place is so special that my uncle was able to witness at that point and share that information with me. Without him being there, I would never have any idea what that practice my great grandmother did and all the things all the stories that she had that she did in her daily life. And that just empowered me to just know and reaffirm the things that I hold true and have been taught from my family and from other people in the community, to really just believe in all of those practices. And again, it's always focused around observation. Everything is all about observation and knowing your place within your surroundings. And that's how it's always been in my journey up to this point. So,
yeah, I wanted to mention that not everybody is an artist. Sorry, not everybody is. Everyone has gifts, and for some people, it just is very natural. And just from teaching, not that there's some students that can do process really well and pay attention to process, and you can tell by the pieces it's technically sound, but there's no wailua in it, it doesn't have the spirit in it. And I think that makes the difference in Native art, is to be able to listen to your calling and to follow it. Because I think when our elders call you, either you accept, and if you don't accept, I tell my students that too, if you don't accept, they're not going to call again. And so when you hear that voice, you got to pay attention. And so I like to think like, Mark, there's this generation that's one below me, that incredible artists, but I have to keep reminding them about source. Go back to the foundation, go back to the foundation. If your voice is saying this, what's the conceptual idea from culture? And maybe that is part of my academic training or being in that environment. But I also believe that I think all the creative process is equal. So we have elders who are practicing maybe just weaving a hat or weaving a basket, but they're putting all their energy into it, and you can tell that these things are gifts, that came out from them. And then you have the contemporary artists that are finding their voice and putting their voice into these works that speak. Sometimes I think as a contemporary artist, I make, my foundation, and not all artists are the same. I like to think that I can do all the customary practice stuff, but that's not where I stay. I do a lot of contemporary things. I do a lot of installations. I do a lot of political voice, because I think that is what my audience, which I hope is a Native audience, can be inspired by and think about. So when they take home, they can think about these ideas, and hopefully they can work that out, and because sometimes we've been suppressed, so we don't want to stir that up. And like Marcus said, we really want to have the discussion. There's nothing wrong with the discussion. It's got to create a safe environment and have the discussion for everyone to have. One of the gifts, I think, that happened in my life was being able to go to Indigenous gatherings in the world. And that's where I met Linda. Linda's here, Loma Heftua. In '95, we went to a gathering in Rotorua. So I still, and then Marcus has gone to them. And so we meet with people from the Northwest, the Southwest, Maori, Tahitian, all over the Pacific. And we are finding that our basic core in our discussion is the same. We're the same. We have the same struggles. We come from the same, kind of thinking how we come from the land. And even our creation stories have parallels. Even our language has parallels. So if I go to New Zealand quite a bit and they're really into their ceremony, I can kind of understand what the speakers are talking about, I can't do it here. Your language is totally different, But I think, we share the same language of looking, if that makes sense. Because when I look at the basketry here, or I look at the things here, I go, oh, we have the same patterns, we have different names, it might have different meanings, but we have the same kind of crossings or the same kind of story.
Yeah, and just kind of building off of that, it makes me think of one of our Pacific communities in actually the Marshall Islands. I've been part of the museum long enough that we've been doing this cultural kind of exchange with the University of the South Pacific in the Marshall Islands to kind of bring back this weaving culture back to the native peoples of the Marshalls. And the Bishop Museum cares for a quite significant collection of these Marshallese fine mats, wearable mats that were used by both men and women as clothing. And I would say 15 years ago now, they started this, the professor at the university there started this program to build up the weaving community in this learning and making of this older form of these wearable mats. At that time, there were only 4 weavers that still knew how to make them, and they were in their 80s at the time. And the only reason why they knew how to make them was because they were little children during World War II. And during that time, a lot of the rations in the Pacific were being halted because of the war effort. And they didn't have those resources that were coming to the island. So they had to make their traditional clothes again. So their grandmothers started to make their traditional clothes, and they were little children, and they experienced them making these clothes because of that moment, because they didn't have canned food coming in, they didn't have cloth coming in, all the clothing things coming in from the outside world. So they went back to their basics, they went back to their traditional dress. And they were so fortunate that these 4 people were willing to share that knowledge. And with the help of the museum, Bishop Museum, we provided access to all of the images of all of the mats, and we actually brought many of them down to the Marshall Islands for them to actually see them, because at that time, I think there was only one mat in the entire country of the Marshall Islands that was still there from their ancestral generations before. Everything else had left the country and were in museums and collections all around the world. And we really wanted to bring that life back to the community. And when we started to hear what they thought about some of the designs, because there were many patterns all throughout the things, and they said each design was made by the woman. They made their own designs. It was up to them. It was their story. There was no family designs. There were no particular designs for particular islands or anything. It was the individual maker and the story that maker imbued into that mat. And that story was the importance. And I thought that was amazing, that idea that the makers were empowered to make the designs and imbue the meaning within those designs. Not this community kind of construct of what each pattern and each design means and everything. It was really that innovation and creativity of each person that was conveyed in those designs. And I think that's very true in many of the patterns in Hawaii. We have designs that have particular names that were associated with them, but they're quite generic. It's like the triangle can be a mountain, it can be a bird, it can be all these kind of generic things. But I think that was much like this instance of the creative process for these weavers in the Marshall Islands, that every person imbued their own story into their design. Yeah, even though the patterns might look the same, if you just put them all together, they all told different stories. Yeah, and I think that's true in what we try to do. I try to do in my work. It references a lot of design motifs and patterns from our past, but I'm trying to bring them to life in a modern context. Yeah, so much like, for instance, my water bottle and the necklaces that I have around my neck. They're based off of, you might have seen a couple of examples of traditional carrying nets that were used as utilitarian tools to carry water gourds or bowls from place to place. And that's what this is referencing. It's referencing that net. But you might have also seen some wearable pieces that I've created over the more recent years that speak to this particular technology and skill, and trying to bring it into a modern context, and not just having the kind of source origin intention of being this utilitarian carrying net, but using it in a wearable form, and conveying and placing that same intention that was used in this onto the body. Yeah. So the net being the thing that protects the vessel within it, providing that structure, and that layer of protection for that vessel. And those vessels were always vessels that held precious things, either food, precious family heirlooms or possessions, and to overlay that idea onto the human form in this modern world, and understanding of a wearable ceremonial garment that speaks to this, still conveys that same intention. It is this new net that is being used to drape and clothe the human vessel that is the cherished caretaker of family traditions and stories and potential for future generations, and making sure that all of that information that single individual cares for, that culture bearer cares for is also clothed and protected in the same way a traditional container would be. So, thinking about things in that way, overlaying some of those old practices into a modern way of thinking, I think really helps the next generation understand how to connect back to the old practices, rather than just making replicas of old things. You can actually bring it to life in a modern way, modern context, that still retains the intention of the original. Yeah.
So Marques mentioned replicas and artifacts, and I used to always say, I talk with my students that we are not a culture, we're a living culture. So if we just do artifacts or things that are in museums, which is okay, because then we learn skill. But we're a living culture, so we are allowed to grow and move to the future because we are alive, and we are allowed. Innovation is using the things around us, because people go, oh, you didn't use that with a chisel or an adze or something. I go, well, if my ancestor had a chainsaw, they would just break that out. They wouldn't be there with the chisel. They would use the chainsaw. And so, the practical dialogue is, and that's the question is, and I have this with his generation, or even with my generation, I have to remember is, are we becoming the ancestor, that we have ancestors that inspire us, that we look to, and are we as alive coming the ancestors of tomorrow? And that's the challenge, I believe. Our behavior, how we transport our viewers into a different creative visual world. We have to think about that. We have a responsibility if we say we're Native. I don't know what our time's like. We're good?
We're at 40,
okay.
38 minutes.
Oh, good. I wasn't paying attention. I can't see that far. I don't have my glasses on. So anyway, I've been having this dialogue with my daughter, actually, because she does a lot of, she goes into communities and does resource management for a coastline. But she doesn't do it, she can do it scientifically, but she actually wants to empower the community. So she's training communities to monitor their own coastline. So when scientists or government comes in and tells you, you got to do this or that, the community will say, well, we've been keeping data of what grows here for so many years, and don't tell us we have to do this because it doesn't work here, because you can't do a generic plan for the whole island. Every part of the island has the way it faces grows different things, the seasons are different, so in some ways that's imparting that community. And working with young children to measure, and they go and grid out the reef and what grows there, and then they come back 3 months later when it's a little more rough, what grows there. Is there fish a certain size? And we have notions that we want to just catch the biggest fish, and from that practice she's going, no, we don't catch the biggest fish, because the big fish lays the most eggs. We're catching juveniles, or like there's hundreds of juveniles, eat them, and let the older certain age group lay the eggs so we can have more eggs. Or we don't eat females. That's a good thing for ladies. They're getting the males, So, and just things like that I think our ancestors practice, and we just forgotten in this world because we just go to the grocery store, which is really, we were having that discussion because of this medical emergency. I was thinking, well, I didn't do any shopping yet, but I think I'm okay, I don't think I need to contribute to the depletion on the shelves and have it all in my house, because I'm hoping that if we take care of our minds and bodies and be healthy physically, that we can fight. I actually had our medicine. We also have a strand in our center that we teach medicinal herbs and practice, like massage, and we have ho'oponopono, which is a practice of bringing people together so we don't carry anger, and have people talk to each other and families. But his classes are packed, and they practice. They bring in their herbs, and they have to drink everything, and he put out a thing last week, which was really interesting about how viruses can't grow or it's like a plant. It can't grow in a place that it's not nourishing for it. It'll grow in a place where the ground is nourishing. So we need to take care of ourselves so it won't grow, And we need to have a positive outlook to actually overcome, within, it may sound very, abstract, but I really believe that because I practice lomi, massage, that we can actually work through this in a more native way. I think the native people have a lot to offer, besides the drugs and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I was actually just looking at the screen now. Much like what Maile was mentioning, when you look at all of the things that have been coming up on the screen, it might not look like there's a connection, because they're also varied. In different kinds of materials, different kinds of designs, all different kinds of things. But again, I think that idea of observation, like Maile's daughter, her observations of nature, environment, all of those things, observations of people and relationships with people, is really the thing that I hope to pass on to the next generation. We always hear about, all of our in previous generations, they were just told, sit down, don't talk, just watch and do, and just make it, and just do it that way, yeah? That might have worked for that generation because maybe the society was different. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone knew all the information, and if all that was needed was to look, and they were able to do it. But now, the community is very different. Generations don't have their grandparents' knowledge. They don't have that understanding of the world. They don't have all those connections to the environment, all of those different things that previous generations had. So now we, as the teachers today, have to teach our generations next in a very different way. We still have elders that are quite staunch and just teach that same way because that's how they were taught. And we have generations that were taught by them, so they're teaching that same way because that's the only way that they know how. But I think once you start asking those questions of why did they teach that way? Was there a reason why they taught it in that form? Asking those questions in that form makes you understand things a little bit differently. And I think their whole thing was, I'm showing you what you need to know. Yeah, this is what you need to know here. But because they were already aware of all those things, that was the bit of information they needed to know. This generation has, in many cases, don't have the entire context to understand that one bit of information anymore. So you really have to teach everything for them to really understand this one bit of information now. And I think that's something that's really special that I'm trying to do with all the people that come to learn from me. I try to teach them and answer as many questions. I say, ask me as many questions as you want. I'm going to answer them if I can, and I'll give you whatever information that I can, because I know that a lot of times they don't have that awareness and understanding of all those things, and to really understand and appreciate the final product, they need to know the whole context. And once they know that, like the physical process, they need to know the material, they need to know all of those different things and why and all those things, they really appreciate it more, and then they hold on to it stronger, with a stronger hold. And I think that's, again, it's just a different way of teaching because of the situation of today. Yeah, we're in a very different world. We have to adapt to our world. We need to change the way that we teach and address these the same issues. It just makes me think about in the university, they were the classes really haven't changed much. over the last 20 years, the same practices and everything. But that's a whole generation now that has been being taught in this way. And the young kids, because they had their parents went through the classes and went through the language classes and everything, they're being taught at this young age, as little kids, being brought up with all of these things, and then they go to the university and they're taking the same classes that their grandparents or their parents took. It's like, it doesn't make sense because they were raised with that information already. So you have to change the way you approach how you teach that information or how you get that information out, because every generation will be different. And I think that whole thing about that, the Renaissance was a pivotal moment because there was that shift in understanding. But now that multiple generations have lived all of those practices now from child to adult and now becoming the teacher for their children, they are aware of all of those things now. And how do we address moving forward in that way?
But I also think that in experience, and if you're paying attention, you're observing that they're shifting. And so actually, we always thought that our language is, even if we have so many schools, we start them off in Punanaleo, which is preschool, and they only are spoken to in Hawaiian. And then they start to go to the Kulakaipuni, which is the immersion schools that are run by the state, and that's in the Hawaiian language. So they're like charter schools, so they're kind of off. And they do get a lot of stuff. We are now getting them in the university. And I'm finding, though, that in the language area, our language, they are entering in a higher level. And so we're hoping, there's a whole group that they're trying to get them to enter and now become the speakers in protocol, because it's not a conversational kind of language, it's a whole different kind of language. And in our arts of practice, how do we bring back, if you're a cultural practitioner in a certain area, because I saw the people go by who are potters, you have your own language within clay, and in your native language, and if you don't pass those words on, like we have our own language in weaving, then they're going to lose those words in the language. And so we're trying to encourage, when we teach our different medias or practices, to try to find the word in our language and use those words so those words don't get forgotten. Be more articulate a little better what they're doing. And so it's not just the practice, it's also the language, it's also relationship building. It's also another big thing we face is resources. So when I teach a certain kind of basketry, which we do with EAEA, it's really rare. You got to go to the mountains and get it. And I tell my students, if I see any of that material in your basket, you get an F. Because you cannot use that material as a beginner. This is for the masters to use. So you can't, and you don't even know how to harvest. You can't go into the wild and just rip the forest, And so that's not for you. You practice on this cane we buy from the store until you get your technique down, and you follow the steps, and then you move to the material that's really more advanced, or else you're just wasting it, So I've actually have some material people given me in our gatherings, like cedar bark from the Northwest. I haven't used that yet, but they're saying, come on, Maile, you can do this, because it feels so precious. And even for them, it's so precious. So we are planting in my classes, we plant our own weaving material, we plant our own bark for making kapa, we have a little dye garden, we plant our own dyes, and then I also give out to students, if they have a yard, to take home material to plant, because if you make pockets all over the island, then we have more resources everywhere, So we're passing it out, and spreading it around, and hopefully it'll catch on. I also believe that I teach this course that has 4 medias, and I tell them not everyone's a weaver, and people cry because they can't weave, they can't see structure, but they can make beautiful kapa, and the person who could weave can't make bark cloth, so you got to find your place, and go with that particular thing. Some people can make nets, they can't weave. Some people can do baskets, they can't do, plate, so the point is you have to practice, and I have students going, oh, I'm a practitioner, and I'm going, wait a minute, you still harvest my plants, you still borrow my tools, I think you're a hobbyist, When you get your own tools and you plant that stuff in your backyard, then you are practicing.
Yeah, and that again, when we think about our ancestors, and even today, they were observers, and they looked at the young children, and they looked and they nurtured those things that they excelled in. Like Maile mentioned, some people might want to like to do things with their hands, so the grandparents pushed them to make this thing, or some children were very good at remembering things, so they became the historians. They were taught all of the stories and songs. And, some people like to move, and they became the dancers. So again, realizing that everyone, like Martin mentioned, every person has their own gift, and the idea that the community supported that and nurtured those things versus everyone learning all of these things, and you all have to do these things all like the same thing. That's a very different way of looking at how to convey culture. And I think, again, going back to that idea of the Renaissance, so many people wanted to learn everything because they felt that it was going to get lost. So everyone was trying to learn every single practice and try to do different things. But, right now, there's so many of those practices that have multiple generations of people and families that have lived and grown in that art form. We can go back to the specialization of our ancestors. We can have the feather makers, we can have the bark cloth makers, we can have the basket makers, we can have all of those different things. We don't have to covet and bring all of those things back together because of this idea of it's going to be lost, because actually it's not. We have the people today that we can go to and ask and to do this for us, or make this, or do these different things. I think, again, just the idea of recognizing that within our community, in our world, that we all need one another. Yeah, we all tried to say that we can be self-sustaining and self-sufficient all on our own, but the community is it is a collection of people because we all need one another to work to live, and that's what that's the definition of a community. Why else would we? Why would we have that if that wasn't the purpose? So, the idea of relinquishing that in many of the generations now are like, yeah, I don't have to learn everything. I can just go ask my uncle. He can do it for me, or I can ask my auntie. He can do that for me. I can do this. All these different things, and that idea of again, just focusing your energy on doing one thing or a particular kind of thing is I think something that is slowly progressing in the generations that we see coming up.
I do all things.
I know you do.
People ask me, what media are you? I go, I'm mixed media because I'm mixed up. I like to dabble in all things. And one of the things I thought of as Marques was talking about is, as we practice our culture, the function of the objects that we are making doesn't exist the same way as our ancestors, and such as bark cloth. And so when I teach making kapa bark cloth, the point is not, the point is not, you take them to a process, but they're not going to wear it, because they can just buy clothing, so it doesn't function as clothing anymore. So I always ask the question, now what are you going to do with bark cloth? If you're going to frame it and put it on the wall, I don't see your ancestor doing that either. But if you're going to frame it and put it on the wall, and it reminds you about what your ancestor did, then it becomes a special object to you because it reminds you of the process of that DNA community and passing that on. So sometimes when we're practicing different processes that I know my ancestor did, I'm recalling, you know, that pace of what my ancestor did. And when I go to the museum and see those old things, it reminds me about, oh, you know, especially those couple pieces that have a little piece of hair in it, you're going, oh, this is so human, you know, like I know this, that a person was sitting here and beating this out. So there's this human relationship and connection that carries us through it. It's not a distant thing, it's really close. And those pieces, you know, I mentioned before, when we make pieces that are new today, we put them with the old pieces because they have to have a conversation with each other. Because they are, you know, the piece is an elder and then the new piece is the youngin, and they got to sit in the space together and have that little conversation going. Even if we, you know, it's a very Western thinking to say that they're just objects. I don't see them as objects. They all have life. We believed everything was alive. You know, stones are alive, trees are alive. Marques mentioned something about the pebble, and I have a direct illustration on that. We were cleaning the awais, which is the waterways that feed our taro patches, and there was this big rock, and it wouldn't move. And like 3 big guys were trying to move it, you know, with the sticks and everything, move it, would not move. And this elder came along, this older man. He has since passed, Uncle Eddie. And he goes, well, did you talk to it? And they go, really? You know, like, he's pretty crazy, you know, you got to talk to the rock. And he said, I'll have a word. And he went to the rock and he told the rock, you know, well, you need to move because we need water coming through this place to feed the taro patch. And they're going to not just push you on the side, they're going to find a nice place for you, you know, of honor. And he said, okay, come back. And it just took one guy to move the rock. You know, and we still have stories like that, and it don't come up as often that in my generation, those stories we hear all the time because our parents told us and our grandparents told us. But in Marques's generation, I try to, like for my children, I try to keep those stories going because we have stories of people lost at sea and sharks guide them in, you know, and we feed sharks. Not all sharks, we name them, they protect the family. You know, we have elements that protect us and that are our family, you know, and we don't eat them, you know, we don't eat that certain kind of fish or we don't eat that certain kind of bird. So it's all these rememberings of what was practiced and to trust. I think we live in a time where I don't trust that immediate, we think, oh, that's kind of crazy because scientifically you can't prove that. But, you know, scientific things is also a theory. You have to put faith in that theory as well as faith in a native theory, you know. So I guess, are we pretty good? Yeah. We actually, I was kind of looking forward to, I will let Marques, if anyone has more to say, we like the dialogue, you know, we're having this conversation, but it's nice to have a conversation. So if you have anything you want to ask or mention, we're really open to it. We were told that if you say something, we will repeat the question so that the live streaming can hear it, if that's okay. So is there anyone? Yes?
Did historically each island have sort of a unique tradition? I know that a couple of the islands maybe no longer have people like Kahalai and stuff, but here in New Mexico, the pueblos would have a distinctive pottery style and you could recognize it. And I'm wondering in the old days when it was a long canoe ride from Kauai to the Big Island, if you evolved different artistic styles.
And attitudes. I'm in the island of Kauai. I married a man who grew up in the island of Kauai, and we were never conquered by Kamehameha. So to this day, people will go, oh, and Kamehameha conquered all the islands. I go, wait, he didn't come to Kauai. You know, so Kauai is kind of known as the rebellious island, you know, because they're not quite, you know, with the politics. But every island had their own chiefs and ruled. And at that period of time when they talk about Kamehameha and uniting all the islands, he didn't succeed in all islands, and there were chiefs in each island. And there were also practitioners of each island. So we, Marcus showed that mat there is a makaloa mat that's distinct to only one island. That sedge only grew in one island. And they were known for that type of mat and different islands. Now when we look at weaving patterns, certain patterns come from certain islands and certain districts. So it's not, it's sort of like language as well. And I know that the linguistic people, even if they teach it in the university, they have to standardize the language of Hawaiian, but each district had their own word for certain specific things. And because I'll get people who will go, well, your Hawaiian is from the university. And I said, well, I wasn't fortunate enough to have a native speaker that I lived with that talked to me every day. So either I'm going to learn it from the university, or I'm not going to learn it at all. And if you can learn it from a native speaker, your grandparent or your parent, how fortunate. You should be so grateful that you can do that, and you should go there. But for some of us, we never got that. There's a generation skip.
Yeah, and the idea of distinctions across the islands, because before, again, like Maile mentioned, before Kamehameha brought all of the islands under one leader, every island was different. And they had their own genealogical family lines that became that resided on those different islands. So yeah, definitely there were designs that maybe were more prevalent in one area than others, just because of, again, probably environment, observations. Kauai is one of the wettest places on the planet, so water designs are probably going to be quite common on Kauai versus on the dry deserts of Ka'u on the island of Hawaii, where there's no rain. You're probably not going to see any rain designs as much as on Kauai in that same way. So there were, I guess, in a sense, there were designs and motifs and different technical skills that were kind of specialized in different areas. There were, but that's not to say that that was the only place that had that kind of design. It was, again, just sharing the stories that were more relevant to the communities of that place in the ways that they were visually presented. Yeah. Yes, question?
My question picks up on what you were just talking about,
Yeah.
actually. I'm very curious to hear both of your thoughts on the relationship between land and water.
Okay. So the question was, yeah. So the question was, what is the cultural relationship between land and water in Hawaii? And in the stories of the creation stories, there is Papa and Wakea. Papa Hanaumoku is Earth Mother. Yeah, she's the creator of land. And Wakea, her husband, is Sky Father, the sky. And the two of them create the entire world. Yeah, they create all of their children, which become the different forms and islands first. Yes, of course. But Papa Hanaumoku, she creates all of the islands in the great ocean. Yeah, and I think in a ocean context, land is the special thing. Like if you're in a landlocked area, water is the thing that is important, right? Because that's what sustains you. You need water to live. In an ocean, you need land. It's the opposite, because that's what you need that to live. But that's also the thing. Once you get to land, that's where your source of fresh water is. That's what gives you life in this massive ocean. And people always think about it in for many communities across the Pacific, they never thought of the ocean as the divider, as this thing that separated the islands. It's the thing that connected the islands together. Yeah, it was the road to connect all of the islands. It wasn't that wall that separated the islands, because we have the stories of generations of voyages going between islands back and forth, communicating with the different islands and the different communities for centuries. We have all of these stories that talk about these these chiefs of the past or navigators that went across the ocean and connected and continually did this. It wasn't until more recently where people stopped going and maintaining those relationships, those long distance relationships, and started to settle into their areas. But you know, that's always been the mindset that the ocean is the connector of all of the land.
The word for, wait 1 minute, the word for land that they use today currently is aina. And aina is that feeds you. So aina is also ocean. Aina is also sky. You know, so it's not separated, it's the whole thing. Anything that feeds you, those elements that feed you, is aina. They tend today to use it just for the land.
Yeah.
But we eat from every place, you know. And so Marcus is correct. You know, when you look in the Pacific, because we travel through the Pacific a lot, the separation is really who colonized who. You know, so Tahiti, you know, was colonized by the French, and so they speak French, and Rutu speaks French, and then New Zealand, Commonwealth, you know, they do English, like Rarotonga or, you know, Tonga, and so there's a lot of French and English going on. But when you talk in the native language, when we go to these places and talk in our native language, our language is so similar. And if I talk slowly and they talk slowly, like if a Tahitian speaks and can talk in an elementary level, because I can't hear quickly, I can understand what they're saying, and that's how we communicate. Because we're all the same language. The Polynesian language is pretty much the same. You know, they use T's, we use K's, they use NG's. Maoris use NG's, we use N's, H, the R's. We don't have R, we have L. You know, so once you start to translate in that way, you can see the connections. You can see the connections in the stories of creation, you know? Mm-hmm. So I find that quite encouraging, actually. Like when we go to our gatherings, it's like seeing our relatives, you know, we with a British accent, though, that's kind of strange. But anyway, you know, you're standing there, we have to hone everybody at the end of the speeches in ceremony, and it's like looking at your auntie, you know, or you're looking at some relatives standing there, you know, and it's quite moving, actually, the connections.
Yeah. And it's also quite interesting, too, because language is interesting because in Hawaii, we had the T's, we had the R's, we had all of the sounds that our cousins in the South Pacific still continue to use. But today we don't have them because the missionaries chose to standardize the language and took away the T and all of the other letters and just used the one letter, K, and in this written form so that they could standardize it and create a dictionary or a language resource to teach the language or convey the language. But we had all of again, like Maile mentioned, we spoke the same language, we had the same sounds, we did everything the same way. It's just how it was recorded in history is how it's conveyed.
Adapting through time,
Yeah.
Because ni hao, they still use T's.
They still use it, yeah. They still use the T's.
You know, so,
we have B.
but they speak so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I saw 2 hands go up. 3, yes.
So, in recent history of Hawaii, people have become so, or the society has become so multicultural. Both of your backgrounds indicate that as well. How does that inform both your thinking and your work?
For me,
Question?
question is paraphrase it, being so multicultural within Hawaii, because we have, is the melting pot. We have so many different cultures there, that how does it affect us today in our work? Is that good? I think I never explored my Chinese side, and I have a friend who is Japanese. He goes, Marty, you need to. I go, well, there's a lot of Chinese. I think there's not that many Hawaiians, so I'm going to do with the minority race, you know? And Hawaii's my home. And so I want to connect to this place that I live. And actually, when I was growing up, my father did not connect to his Chinese side. He actually he cooked a lot, you know, and he would just do all the Hawaiian food and everything for the family and go to all the Hawaiian events. And we hardly went to Chinese events. So I wasn't raised on that side. I think it depends on what focus you are wanting to highlight. But I also think that's also a beauty, because those of you, probably everyone has been to Hawaii. You know, you can get all kinds of food, see all kinds of people. It's such a mixed culture, and that's the beauty of the diversity and fun of.
For me, I actually wasn't raised with my Hawaiian culture. My grandfather passed away before I was born, so I really didn't have that direct connection. My mother and my uncles talked about the stories about what they did with him, and you know, shared some of those practices that they learned from him. But I was really raised with my Japanese and my Filipino grandparents, so I had all of those different foods, like Maile mentioned, the foods that were on a regular basis, and asking my grandparents about some of their traditional cultural practices and things like that. But it wasn't until I was in high school and going into college that I really kind of connected with my Hawaiian culture. And through the university, through the art department with Maile, and then just connecting with different elders in the community, really kind of inspired me to again, connect in that way. So I think I'm kind of fortunate, because I really do identify with all of my ethnic cultural backgrounds, and I think that they all come forward in my work. You know, everything that I do is because of those experiences that I had with my grandparents, and my time at the university, and my time with the elders in the community in Hawaii. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without having all of those experiences. And I know I have, you know, at the university and other cultural groups and groups that I belong to, we have I have a lot of friends that have multiple ethnic backgrounds, and I think I have one friend, he said he has like 18 different ethnicities that he's part of. Like, wow, how did all that happen? Well, you know, it's like all these different, yeah, we are the melting pot, of course. Yeah, so, and other things. So, but again, I think it really is, again, like Maile mentioned, how we connect, and what it is that, what community we connect with, or what family stories we push forward. And again, me being fortunate to have the strength of both my Japanese and Filipino sides in my daily upbringing as a child, and up until going to college, really, I guess, molded me to the person that I am today.
Well, we got the time thing, but we are really interested in your questions, and maybe after, you know, so we don't hold everyone up, we're really open to stay, and you can come talk to us, yeah. You know, and so we can let people go if they want to go. But I just got the time out there, so we're good. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you
and
very
thank you
much.
for your interesting questions.